Hi everyone, this is Dr. G. Saiti Datar, Team MDS Conquer. So I'm pretty sure you must have gone through many cases and you have studied many diseases in your books, right? And you're well aware of all the important features of those diseases. But yet it becomes quite challenging when you have to think analytically and apply the same in the exam, right? So in this regard, I've brought some interesting cases for you, and also I'll explain of how to think analytically and apply in your exam so as to arrive at the correct answer. Okay, so let's start with the first one. So here there is a patient who is 75-year-old man with a swelling of the face. Always try to habituate yourself to underline the key points or at least note them down. Okay, so that will help you out to arrive at the correct answer. So here there is a swelling of the face which was reported by the 75-year-old man, and there is a history of diabetes since 6 years. So the patient is known diabetic since 6 years. Now the extraoral examination has showed a non-tender swelling of the face. So there is a non-tender swelling of the face, and the patient is unable to see from his left eye, and is also having impaired sense of smell. He is having speech difficulty as well as nasal stuffiness. So all these are the important features which were exhibited by the patient. So do underline them. Next, intraoral examination has revealed a necrosis of the mucosa and the underlying bone. So if you can see in the picture, that clearly shows there is a necrosis of the mucosa along with that of the underlying bone in relation to the canine to the tuberosity area of the left vestibule of the maxilla. And the CT of this patient, when it was taken, it has showed some paranasal sinusitis. So histopath examination has shown broad septae which are at right angles along with the area of necrosis. So there are broad septae which are at right angles. So what could be the probable diagnosis? Okay, so now this is a case-based study which is presented here. So here the patient is having swelling, little swelling of the face, and he is unable to see. He is having little impaired sense of smell, nasal tuffiness, speech difficulty, and also there is very important point to be underlined, that is necrosis and histopath examination. So obviously if the histopath examination is being given in the question, so there is a final diagnosis for that question, right? So what is the diagnosis? So here you have to go for the options one by one. Bacterial sinusitis. So why it could be bacterial sinusitis? Because the CT has revealed a paranasal sinusitis, right? But bacterial sinusitis, the patients usually complain and they arrive at your clinic with a complaint of pain while bending the head, right? And the other clinical features will not be so severe as presented by this patient. There is no such necrosis or there is no loss of vision and all that, right? So it can't be bacterial sinusitis. Okay, next, mucormycosis. Yes, it can be mucormycosis. We'll discuss that. Geotrichosis. Usually geotrichosis again is a fungal disease, but it shows a velvety patch in the oral mucosa. It will not be having this sort of presentation. So it is not geotrichosis. Next, aspergillosis. Yes, even in aspergillosis there is little of cerebral involvement, but if there are two fungal diseases which are being given and which has little similar features, then you have to end up with the histopath examination to go for the final diagnosis. So here the aspergillosis can be the diagnosis. Why? Because the histopath examination in aspergillosis will not be the one as presented here. It will have narrow septae which are at acute angle. Here the septae are broad with right angle presentation, whereas in aspergillosis the septae will be narrow and acute angle. Okay, so that differentiates between the mucormycosis and aspergillosis. So you have to go for the answer, that is mucormycosis. Why? We'll be discussing that further. Okay, so now how to answer is you have to go for the options one by one and eliminate them, and then you have to arrive at the correct answer. Okay, so this present case is mucormycosis. Okay, so mucormycosis is severe, relatively uncommon, fatal mycosis. Okay, it's one of the most severe form of fungal disease. Okay, so predisposing factors include diabetes mellitus, leukemias, lymphomas, renal transplant patients who are little immunocompromised. In those patients, this has a chance to occur. This mucormycosis has its chance to occur in the immunocompromised host. Okay, here the patient, the particular case which I have presented here, he is a known diabetic. Okay, so one of the predisposing factors for mucormycosis to occur is diabetes mellitus. Why? Okay, there is a reason. There could be a reason for this. Why? Because in diabetes mellitus, because of high sugar levels, the spores germinate. Okay, when the spores germinate, the hyphae tend to develop and they invade into the tissue. And also this mucormycosis has a tendency to cause a thrombosis of the blood vessels, because of which the associated tissues undergoes necrosis. So that's the reason this patient also has a necrosis. The classic feature being it's a black necrotic eschar will be formed because the blood vessels undergoes thrombosis, because of which the associated tissue will lack the nutrient supply, right? So because of which they end up with necrosis. Okay, and even after causing the necrosis, this mucormycosis will not remain quiet. It will invade deep into the surrounding tissue, even in the devitalized tissue. Okay, so it grows in the devitalized tissue and it invades to the surrounding tissue. Okay, it is so fatal, right? And next, coming to the clinical scenario regarding the mucormycosis. So there is a rhinomaxillary and a rhinocerebral forms of mucormycosis. Okay, so rhinomaxillary, so it can involve the nasal cavities, it does involve the maxilla, and also it has tendency to involve the brain. Why? Because the hyphae of this particular fungal disease can spread to the dural sinuses like the cavernous sinus, via which it can spread to the brain, and also it can spread to the orbits. Okay, so that's the reason in this particular patient, since it involves the brain and it can also involve the orbit, the patient has presented with loss of vision, and also the patient has nasal stuffiness, right? So it is again a sign of involvement of the nasal cavities, right? And the patient also has shown the involvement of the maxilla. Okay, so all these goes in favor of the rhinomaxillary and the rhinocerebral forms of the mucormycosis. Okay, so this is one of the important clinical aspects related to the mucormycosis. So do note these 2 points. Okay, so that is the reason the patient will have such severe symptoms as presented by our particular case which I have given here. Okay. Next, coming to the differential diagnosis. So bacterial sinusitis, yes, because the CT has revealed paranasal sinusitis, so you can go for bacterial sinusitis, but yes, the patient will not have so much severe symptoms as given by this patient. Okay, in bacterial sinusitis, the patient will be having just pain and heaviness in his sinus, and also that heaviness can be felt over the molars, okay, over the roots of the upper maxillary teeth. So all those similar complaints will be there, but not the necrosis and the loss of vision or loss of the sense of smell and all that will not be there. Very rare, okay, unless and until the patient has severe nasal stuffiness, the patient will have little impaired sense of smell, but such severe symptoms will not, such necrosis and all will not be presented by the bacterial sinusitis. So that is ruled out. And next, aspergillosis, as I said, that is, even that has a cerebral involvement. Even aspergillosis also has little severity because it shows severe cerebral involvement. So that's the reason it has severity, but the histopath examination will decide whether it is mucormycosis or whether it is aspergillosis. So in mucormycosis, it's broad septae which are at right angle, whereas in aspergillosis, it is narrow septae at acute angle. Okay, so this is the important thing that you need to know. That's the reason you have to end up with mucormycosis. And one more important point I just want to bring to your notice that there are few cases which have been reported in literature regarding the mucormycosis which have occurred in post-COVID-19 patients who have been recovered. Okay, so few patients have arrived at the dental clinic with similar presentation in their maxilla. So there are little cases that have been reported in the literature. Okay, so why mucormycosis can occur in a post-COVID-19 patients? Why? Because maybe the COVID-19 patients, we know they have been given with long-term steroids, right? Dexamethasone is one of the treatment modality that is being given for the COVID-19 patients, and dexamethasone being a steroid, it is immune suppressant, and also it can cause hyperglycemia, okay, which again favors for this fungal disease to occur, right? So as I said, in diabetes mellitus, whenever there is hyperglycemia or high glucose levels, the spores germinate and the hyphae tend to develop and invade the tissue, right? So maybe that could be the reasons for why the COVID-19 has caused the mucormycosis in few patients, because of the treatment modality that is being given for those patients. Okay, so in this way also the COVID-19 has affected the morbidity and has caused little mortality in few cases as reported in the literature. So that I want to bring to your notice. Next, coming to the histopath, as I said, it's right angle branched septae which are broad, and treatment. So these patients, since it is little fatal, you have to go for immediate antifungal treatment. So the patients has to be put under intravenous antifungal, especially amphotericin B. Okay, so that is the main treatment that is being given, so that the prognosis of the case or the prognosis of the disease will be better. Okay, so it has to be immediately started and then you have to observe for the symptoms to improve. Okay, so that is regarding the mucormycosis, which is a very important fungal disease that you need to know. Okay, so the next case is of a 40-year-old lady who has presented with the chief complaint of ulcers in the mouth and difficulty in swallowing food, solid as well as liquid, since 20 days, and history has revealed that the patient has noticed dysphagia for solid food that has progressively increased in its severity, and at the time of presentation the patient is also having dysphagia for the liquid food as well, and the patient has noticed multiple ulcers, okay, which were bleeding on brushing, and the clinical presentation of the chronic multiple oral ulcers and the flaccid bullae is shown as in the picture. So it is shown in the picture. So the flaccid bullae and the chronic oral multiple ulcers were shown in the picture, as you can see. And what is your diagnosis? So here first underline the key points. So there is complaint of oral ulcers and dysphagia, and is chronic multiple oral ulcers and flaccid bullae as shown in the picture. Okay, so this is a picture that is clearly showing the chronic multiple oral ulcers. Now let's go for the diagnosis. So let's see the options one by one. So the first option being given is a bullous lichen planus. So any type of lichen planus, either it could be bullous or atrophic or reticular, there will be striae. Okay, either it is atrophic or erosive or bullous lichen planus, at least one or two peripheral Wickham striae will be there. Okay, in this particular case you can't see any peripheral striae, right? So Wickham striae is not at all seen in this picture. So it is not bullous lichen planus, right? Next, coming to the recurrent herpes infection. So usually it is common in children, and herpes being viral infection, patients will have prodromal symptoms. Most commonly the patient will have prodromal symptoms like fever, malaise, etc. So in this particular patient there were no prodromal symptoms, right? So recurrent herpes infection cannot be the answer. Next, major aphthous ulcer and pemphigus vulgaris is a doubt where you have to go for the answer, right? So in major aphthous ulcer there will be no tissue tags, okay, whereas tissue tags will be there in pemphigus vulgaris. So if you see the particular case, in aphthous ulcer it was just an ulcer which is covered by a slough and surrounded by erythematous halo. There will be no tissue tags. Whereas in pemphigus vulgaris, the epithelium, because of the suprabasilar split, the epithelium will hang over the ulcer like a tag. Okay, so that is called as a tissue tag, which will not be there with the major aphthous ulcer. So here you can see clear-cut tissue tags which are lying here and there, right, which are hanging over the ulcer. So that goes in favor of pemphigus vulgaris. So the answer for this question is pemphigus vulgaris, because the picture clearly shows the presence of tissue tags. Okay, so that is pemphigus vulgaris. So now let's discuss pemphigus vulgaris in detail. So coming to the etiology of pemphigus vulgaris, it is autoimmune, life-threatening mucocutaneous disease. It's a blistering mucocutaneous disease which is autoimmune. Why is it life-threatening? There is a reason, probably because in pemphigus vulgaris there are bullae, right, which have disseminative spread, and these bullae, they are so tense and flaccid, they rupture very easily, and whenever they rupture there is loss of fluid, right? So because of bullae that rupture and there is loss of fluid and there is a disseminative spread, there can be a chance of dehydration, and dehydration could be life-threatening. So that's the reason why the pemphigus vulgaris being life-threatening is because of the bullae that tend to rupture and that can cause loss of fluid, okay, because of its disseminative spread. So one of the important point to be noted. Next etiology, as I said, it is autoimmune. So they are auto antibodies which are formed against desmoglein 1 and 3, okay. But in pemphigus vulgaris, predominantly the auto antibodies are against desmoglein 3, which are again abundant with the mucous membrane, which are again abundant with the mucous membrane, okay. So that is the reason why the pemphigus vulgaris, the oral lesions appear to be first, because most of the autoantibodies are against desmoglein 3. So predominantly the autoantibodies are against desmoglein 3 followed by the desmoglein 1, and desmoglein 3 is abundantly with the mucous membranes. That's the reason the oral lesions appear to be first in pemphigus vulgaris. Whereas in pemphigus foliaceus, which is another type, okay, pemphigus foliaceus, most of the antibodies, autoantibodies are against desmoglein 1. That's the reason skin lesions appear to be more prominent, or they appear to be first in pemphigus foliaceus, okay, whereas oral lesions appear to be first in the pemphigus vulgaris, okay. So skin lesions appear to be first in pemphigus foliaceus and oral lesions appear to be first with pemphigus vulgaris, because the autoantibodies are predominantly against desmoglein 3, which are abundant with the mucous membrane. So that is an important point to be noted. Next, coming to the clinical features. So there is a Nikolsky sign. So it's nothing but whenever you apply pressure, or whenever you place your finger or apply your pressure on an area where there is no lesion, new lesion appears there. Why? Because in pemphigus vulgaris there is suprabasilar split. Right. So because of the suprabasilar split, which is seen histopathologically, the superficial layers will be separated from the bottom layers. So that's the reason the new lesion appears there. Okay. So that is nothing but the Nikolsky sign. The superficial layers will be separated from the bottom layers because of the suprabasilar split, which goes in favor of Nikolsky sign, which is positive with the pemphigus vulgaris. Next one is Asbo-Hansen sign, which is nothing but the bullae spread phenomena, where we apply pressure laterally on the bullae and the bullae will spread laterally. So when you apply pressure on the bullae will spread laterally. That is nothing but the bullae spread phenomena, which is also called as a Asbo-Hansen sign. So these are the two important clinical features which are being exhibited by the pemphigus vulgaris patients. Next, coming to the histopath features. So number 1, as I said, the suprabasilar split. Number 2 is a Jank cell, okay, which is also seen with herpes zoster, herpes simplex. Okay, these Jank cells are nothing but acantholytic cells which have hypertrophic nuclei and also have a perinuclear halo. Okay, so this is one of the important histopath feature of pemphigus vulgaris. Next, coming to the treatment aspect. So treatment. So since it's an autoimmune disease, you can go for steroids. Okay, so if it is a very mild case, you can simply treat with the topical steroids like triamcinolone acetonide. But if it is a severe case, then you have to go for systemic steroids, because steroids, it has its immune suppressive action. Besides that, anti-inflammatory action as well. So both these actions are exhibited by the steroids. That's the reason one of the important treatment modality for pemphigus vulgaris is the corticosteroids. Besides that, you can also give some other immunosuppressive drugs, but most commonly in the clinical setting, the corticosteroids like the prednisone systemically is being given. Okay, so that is regarding the important points with respect to the pemphigus vulgaris. Next, let's discuss the other options which I have given here. So first one, if you see, is a bullous lichen planus. Okay, so here if you see, there is striae here and there. Right, so there is an ulcer which has peripheral striae, so that is bullous lichen planus. Okay, so this is how the bullous lichen planus look. So bullous lichen planus, even that ruptures to form ulcer, but you can see peripheral Wickham striae. Next, coming to the major aphthous ulcer, so you can see there is a big ulcer which is about greater than 1 centimeter and it has a erythematous halo. There is no tissue tag. Okay, so there is just, it appears to be like a classic ulcer and without any tissue tag. So this goes for major aphthous. So this is how the other options which I have given look. Okay, so just have a look of the pictures posted. You will get a good idea of how to differentiate pemphigus vulgaris from the other diseases. Okay, so next one more question related to the same pemphigus vulgaris. So which of the following statements can be considered true regarding the pemphigus vulgaris except, so there is an exception, whereas the other options are true. Oral lesions appear to be first than the skin. Yes, in pemphigus vulgaris, most of the antibodies, autoantibodies are against desmoglein 3, which are predominantly with the mucous membrane. So oral lesions appear to be first. Jang cells seen histologically? Yes, the Jang cells are very important feature seen histologically. Next, pulse therapy cannot be given. Wrong. Pulse therapy can be given. What is pulse therapy? Pulse therapy is nothing but discontinuous infusion of steroids. So steroids are given as short bursts. Okay, they are given as short bursts, as pulses. Why? In order to get more clinical improvement, as well as in order to prevent the long-term side effects of the steroids. We know steroids has none number of side effects, right? So in order to prevent the long-term side effects, as well as to get good clinical improvement, discontinuous infusion of steroids along with other immune suppressive drug is being given. So that is nothing but pulse therapy. So most commonly in pulse therapy, which the drugs being given is a dexamethasone and other immune suppressive drug, that is cyclophosphamide. Okay, so commonly DCP is being tried for autoimmune diseases like pemphigus, lichen planus, so as to reduce or so as to decrease the side effects of the steroids. Okay, so dexamethasone along with other immunosuppressive drug can be given as short pulses. So that is nothing but pulse therapy, and it can be given in pemphigus. Okay, so this is the answer. It cannot be given is wrong. It can be given. Whereas immunofluorescence shows fishnet appearance, yes, it is one of the important feature again exhibited by the pemphigus vulgaris because of the deposition of the immunoglobulins and the complements along the keratinocytes. It gives a classic fishnet appearance when seen via immunofluorescence. Okay, so answer is pulse therapy cannot be given is wrong. Pulse therapy can be given, whereas the other options are true. So now if you see the differences here between the pemphigus foliaceus and pemphigus vulgaris based on the etiology. So here in pemphigus vulgaris, the mucocutaneous type, as I said, the autoantibodies are predominantly against desmoglein 3, right? So this is with the mucosa. That's the reason the oral lesions are first and more when compared to the skin lesions in pemphigus vulgaris. Whereas coming to the pemphigus foliaceus, here it is against desmoglein 1, right? So the skin lesions are first and are little more severe when compared to oral lesions in pemphigus foliaceus. So this picture clearly shows the difference based on the etiology between the pemphigus foliaceus and pemphigus vulgaris. Okay, so now let's see the picture, histopath picture. So this is nothing but the Jang cell. Okay, so Jang cell, which is an acantholytic cell which has hypertrophic nuclei and a perinuclear halo. Okay, so that is with pemphigus vulgaris, which is a characteristic feature. Besides that, in herpes simplex and herpes zoster also we can find this Jang cells. Okay, so that is an important point. And here if you see, this is a fishnet appearance. So because of the deposition of the immunoglobulins and the complements along the keratinocytes, it gives a fishnet appearance in an immunofluorescence study. So this is again for pemphigus vulgaris. So all these are very important aspects related to the pemphigus vulgaris. So just note it down. Okay. So next, let's jump to the other case. So here if you see, a patient was presented with generalized pruritus and alopecia, and also he has ridges of the nails. So what is your diagnosis? A simple question. So if you see the picture and give a good glance to the picture that is posted here, there are pruritic papules which are purple in color, right? So they are purple if you see, right? And also the patient has pruritus, right? And they are papule. Okay, they are like papules with and little like few of the lesions are like polygonal. Okay, so all these are the derivatives of the picture that is posted. So the lesion which is given here on the feet, you can see these are the derivatives, that is, they are purple, they are pruritic, they are papular and they are polygonal, right? And if you see the scalp, it is alopecia is there and also scarring is there. So here there is scarring and there is alopecia. So both these go in favor of the lichen planus of the skin. Okay, so if you see the options here, first psoriasis, Auspitz sign will be there, right? And also one of the important clinical feature is dry scaly skin will be there, right? So here there is no such Auspitz sign or dry scaly skin is not present. So the answer is not psoriasis. Next, pemphigus, Nickelkiss sign will be there or bulle will be there, right? So all that is not presented here, so it is not pemphigus. Next, lichen planus, yes, I said it is lichen planus, especially of the skin and the scalp. We'll be discussing that further. Next, acrodynia. It can't be acrodynia. Why? Because in acrodynia, which is nothing but mercury toxicity, the patient will be having pinkish color discoloration of the extremities, completely pinkish discoloration. Here it is not presented like that, so even it can't be acrodynia, right? So the answer for this is lichen planus. Okay, so lichen planus of the skin has 6 P's. 6 P's. Okay, so those P's are planar, plaque, pruritic, purple, polygonal and papular. Okay, so in this present case which was presented, the patient was having the purple, pruritic, polygonal, papular type lesions on the skin, right? So that goes in favor of lichen planus of the skin. Number 1. Number 2, the patient was having alopecia and scarring of the scalp, right? So it is nothing but lichen planopilaris. It is lichen planopilaris which is involving the scalp, and that is being seen with a syndrome called as Graham-Little syndrome. So one of the syndromes which is being associated with lichen planus is Graham-Little syndrome. We already know Greenspan syndrome, right? Besides that, it is Graham-Little syndrome, and one more syndrome is vulvovaginal gingival syndrome. Here, if you see the present case, there is alopecia as well as scarring of the scalp, so which is nothing but the lichen planopilaris. Okay, so this is an important point to be noted. Okay, so the answer for this question is definitely lichen planus. And one more thing, the patient also presented ridges in the nails. Okay, so when lichen planus involves the nails, there will be longitudinal ridging of the nail plate. Okay, so one of the important feature again. And there can also be onycholysis, which is nothing but painless detachment of the nail from its nail bed, and subungual hyperkeratosis. Okay, there can be hyperkeratosis that can be seen. And next, tracheonychia, okay, which is nothing but linear striations can be seen, and pterygium formation. So all these nail deformities can also be presented with lichen planus. So these are the important features when lichen planus involves the nails. So in this present patient, there is skin lesions which have shown pruritic, papular and polygonal purplish color lesions, right? So that goes for lichen planus of the skin. And hair shows, the scalp shows alopecia as well as scarring, so it goes for lichen planopilaris. And there is also ridges in the nails which is given in the question, so that is nothing but the lichen planus is involving the nails. So all these goes in favor of diagnosis, that is lichen planus. Okay, so that is the important point related to the lichen planus when it's involving the skin, the scalp as well as the nails. Okay, now let's go to the other question. So the next case is a 50-year-old female with a medical history of hypertension and diabetes mellitus type 2. So the history clearly says is hypertensive and diabetes mellitus, and a major depression disorders presented with intracerebral vomiting and altered sensorium. So the patient was having some depression disorders, and also the patient was having vomitings and altered sensorium. And about 8 to 10 hours prior to the presentation, the patient was experiencing multiple episodes of non-bloody vomiting with nausea leading to fatigue and altered sensorium, which is required for the patient to be immediately admitted to the hospital. So which of the following investigations you need to perform in order to arrive at the diagnosis? Okay, so here if you see, the patient is diabetic mellitus, number 1. Number 2, the patient is having intracerebral vomitings and little altered sensorium, right? And the patient was so fatigued that he has to immediately admit to the hospital, right? So what is the investigations that you need to perform? Since there is an altered sensorium, right, and the patient is having multiple episodes of vomiting, so in order to rule out any traumatic or any other problems related to the brain, it's better to take the CT or MRI of the brain. Okay, yes, so you have to take a CT or MRI of the brain, and Next, serum glucose. Yes, the patient is already diabetic. She gives a history of that. So it's better to rule out the serum glucose and to know whether the patient is under control or not. So yes, you have to take the serum glucose. Next, ketone bodies of blood and urine, whether you have to take or not. Yes, you have to take. Why? Because diabetes mellitus, when it is uncontrolled, okay, it leads to a complication which is called as diabetic ketoacidosis. Okay, it leads to a complication when it is uncontrolled. Why? Diabetes mellitus, either it could be because of the lack of insulin or because of the insulin resistance. As a consequence of any of that, the cells will not receive its energy in the form of glucose, right? The cells of the body will not have its energy. In that case, what exactly happens is the cells will search for a fuel to get the energy. So it will go in search of a fuel as a source of energy, and that fuel is nothing but the fat. Okay, the fuel is in form of a fat, the fat which undergoes breakdown and releases the ketones. Those ketones will be seen in the serum and also will be seen in the urine. Okay, so this is one of the most important complication related to the diabetes, which is nothing but the diabetic ketoacidosis, and the patients will usually present with confused state, with altered sensorium, with severe fatigue, so that they immediately will be admitted in the hospital. Okay, so that is a very important complication related to the diabetes. So that's the reason you have to rule out the ketone bodies both in the serum as well as in the urine. Okay, yes. Next, serum electrolytes like sodium. Yes, you have to go for the sodium because the patients with diabetic ketoacidosis, they can have hyponatremia. Why? Because if there is increased glucose levels, okay, so if there is increased glucose, there will be increased plasma tonicity. Okay, so when there is increased glucose levels, there will be increased plasma tonicity, because of which it drives the water from intracellular area to the extracellular area. Okay, so water will be drived. Okay, there will be driving force which pulls the water from intracellular space to extracellular space, because of which it dilutes the concentration of sodium. Okay, so that can result in hyponatremia. So you have to go for serum electrolytes like sodium as well, because the water is pulled from the intracellular space to extracellular space, which dilutes the concentration of the sodium. So you have to go for serum electrolytes as well. Okay, so these are the important investigations that you need to perform so as to arrive at the diagnosis of diabetic ketoacidosis. Okay, so that is an important complication of diabetes mellitus. So as to arrive at the diagnosis, you have to go for all the investigations that I have given here. Clear? So this is a case of diabetic ketoacidosis, so wherein you have to go for ketone bodies, have to go for serum glucose, and also you have to go for the electrolytes as well. Clear? So that is nothing but this case, that is diabetic ketoacidosis, which is a very important complication and very important thing that you need to know regarding the diabetes mellitus. Okay, so next case is a 59-year-old patient who has reported with mild dull pain over the anterior mandibular region. So underline, it's an anterior mandibular region for a period of 15 days. Okay, and the radiographs have revealed multilocular radiolucent lesion. So there's multilocular appearance which is seen in the radiograph anteriorly. And the histopath, so there is a histopath feature which is being given, so you can directly go for the final diagnosis. So histopath features have shown pseudostratified columnar epithelium with filiform extensions of the cytoplasm and mucus secreting cells and intraepithelial spherule formation. So what is your diagnosis? So there is spherule formation and mucus secreting cells. Okay, so your diagnosis. So here again go for the options one by one. So central giant cell granuloma being the first option given. So yes, the common site is anterior mandible and also there is multilocular appearance when seen in the radiograph. But the histopath feature shows multinucleated giant cells. Okay, so which is not given here, right? So the answer cannot be central giant cell granuloma because there is a clear-cut histopath feature that is being given with the diagram that is showing a spherule formation, right? So it cannot be central giant cell granuloma because multinucleated giant cells being a characteristic feature seen histopathologically related to central giant cell granuloma. Next, glandular odontogenic cyst, also called as sialo-odontogenic cyst. Yes, it can be the answer. First, we'll rule out the other two as well. Next, option C given is the adenomatoid odontogenic tumor. So, AOT, the common site is anterior maxilla, right? Okay. So, even that cannot be the answer because the common site is anterior maxilla and the histopath feature is not like this. So, it cannot be AOT. So, answer is not AOT. Next, squamous papilloma, it is epithelial in origin. It appears to be a small cauliflower like wart which is seen over the epithelium. So, even it cannot be that. So, the answer for this question is a glandular odontogenic or the sialo-odontogenic cyst. The common site for the sialo-odontogenic cyst, number 1, anterior mandible. Okay. Next, even it shows multilocular appearance in the radiograph and the histopath features, the clearly which is given in the question here, that is the mucus secreting cells are there with spherule formation. So, all these goes in favor of the glandular odontogenic or sialo-odontogenic cyst. So, the answer for this case is a sialo-odontogenic cyst. Okay. So, with this we have done with few interesting cases. We'll continue and we'll discuss few more in the next part. Thank you.